evening. The Amos Fortune Forum is in session. Good evening, everybody. My name is Bob Shawman, and I want to welcome you tonight to the presentation as part of our 77th season of the Amos Fortune Forum. Brad Smith, who is normally here, is out on vacation, so you get to see a new face tonight. Not one as pretty, however. So I just have a few introductory remarks, which I'll keep short, then it'll be my pleasure to introduce our speaker. First, please join me in thanking Nan Biter. We had a great and very good discussion. Nan hosted our speaker and his guests this evening over at her house for dinner. Delightful, delicious, and good conversation. Also like to thank Susan Sarles for sponsoring the beautiful flowers from Kohl's. And we'd like to also thank Eleanor Elburn-Slew and her daughter Rachel for hosting the reception, which is following tonight's presentation. We hope you'll join us so you can meet our speaker, Mark Beckwith, and enjoy some light refreshments. Follow the lanterns just outside the door, across the parking lot to the First Church in Jaffrey's Parish Hall. We'd like to thank, of course, our generous corporate sponsors and many individual contributors, without whom we would not be able to continue this important and vibrant form of ideas. Now, at the doors and on your seats, you will find cards that you can either fill out here or scan the QR code with your phone to link to our website, where you can learn more about the forum, about upcoming speakers. We have 3 more before our season is over, and or to make a donation. There are also our traditional, begging bowls, both at the rear and over at the front. And we encourage those who have not already made a donation to feel free to do so. The Amos Fortune Forum, of course, remains free for all to attend, as it has been since 1946. Lastly, we are recording tonight's presentation for those who are not able to attend, or perhaps who are not nearby. And you'll find this on YouTube as soon as we get it posted, although we encourage everyone, of course, to come to the presentations live. It seems polarization is all around us, and whether it's about the presumed candidates for the November presidential election, women's reproductive rights, or even if the Red Sox are a good team, some would say that Americans take sides and strongly defend their perspective, regardless as to the subjective correctness of their views. The Amos Fortune Forum this evening is privileged to present Mark Beckwith, retired Episcopal Bishop of Newark, New Jersey, where he served for 12 years in that position prior to his retirement in 2018. His resume is very impressive. Newark, New Jersey, plagued with gang violence for decades, was a catalyst for Mark's efforts to help found the Newark Interfaith Coalition for Hope and Peace, a group of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim leaders, all committed to the effective mobilization of resources. Mark is also the co-founder of Faith Leaders for Ending Gun Violence and Bishops United Against Gun Violence. This is a network of 100 bishops he co-founded after the tragic Sandy Hook Elementary School shootings in 2012. He has been part of the leadership team for Braver Angels, a national movement that seeks to depolarize America, and he's the author of Seeing the Unseen, Beyond Prejudices, Paradigms, and Party Lines, which was published in 2022. Mark, I don't want to make you too old there. Mark is a graduate of Amherst College and Yale Divinity School, and he lives right here in Jaffrey. He can be followed on his website at markbeckwith.net. This evening, Mark invites you to reflect on today's most contentious topics from beyond the deeply polarized socio-political norm. And he will discuss how doing so can encourage a more harmonious and open-minded society. So with that all being said, it's my honor to introduce our own Jaffrey resident, Mark Beckwith, and his thoughtful presentation on seeing beyond polarization. Mark?
Thank you, Bob, and I want to thank the Amos Fortune Committee for inviting me, and I want to thank the Amos Fortune legacy of 77 years, which brings people together to contemplate issues of importance that we need to think about, need to reflect on. I also want to thank the community of Jaffrey. The community of Jaffrey, where I've lived permanently now for 4 years, but have had residence here for 17. And I'm gathered here, as many of us are, by Mount Monadnock. But as I continue to live here, I'm gathered by the community of people who are passionate about being in relationship, sharing ideas, their faith, their passion, all of that. So I'm really grateful for this community, its beauty, and its heart. What I'm going to do this evening is tell some personal stories of what I consider my own cultural blindness, what I don't see or what I choose not to see, and some historical stories that I think explain my and perhaps your cultural blindness, language that we use that may contribute to that cultural blindness, and then how to address it, and the polarization which has become so toxic these days, which I think is a manifestation of our blindness. So I want to begin with a story. I was newly elected Bishop of Newark in New Jersey. Our office was downtown. And in my first week there, I noticed that there were men gathering outside every day during the week at a soup kitchen. And they were coming to be served food. And I noticed them, and after 2 weeks, they just faded into the background. They faded into the Passaic River view that I had. I wasn't seeing them at all. Why is that? Because I was on the 4th floor of my office, looking out at the diocese of 100 congregations, their challenges, their possibilities, their issues, and that's where my attention, that's where my vision was focused. About 2 or 3 years in, a colleague, a priest in the diocese, came up to me and asked, "What goes on next door?" And I said, "Oh, there's a soup kitchen." And she said, "Let's go." So we went next door, not to serve, but to have conversations with, and I'm embarrassed to say this, 250 men at breakfast and 250 men at lunch who I didn't see. And so we had conversations and we debriefed after this time. And I remember she stuck her finger in my chest and she said, "Don't you dare go just once." And so I didn't. I went every week. And I began to develop relationships with many of these men. Most of them, almost all of them, were people of color. Many of them have been kicked to the curb by a society that doesn't honor them. Some of them have kicked themselves to the curb. But many of them, some of them, lived with a level of faith and courage that had never been tested to that degree in me. And some of them became my most important teachers, and I didn't see them. I think there's many explanations for why that was the case for me. My guess is that all of us here have a similar kind of story of people who we live near or work near or traffic near that we don't see because we've been taught not to see them. I think one explanation for this, is a psychohistory. It's a story of René Descartes, who many would argue is the founder of Western philosophy. In 1610, the king of France, King Henry, embodied the hope of the country. He was deeply committed to religious tolerance, which was unique at that time. And the king himself moved from being Huguenot to Catholic back and forth several times. He was also committed to ensuring that people had enough to eat. His religious tolerance didn't sit well with some, and as he was driving through the city in his carriage, a man attacked him, stabbed him to death, and he died. And with it, the hope of the country sort of died with him. It was the practice in those days to take the heart of the slain leader, put it on a carriage, and carry it to the church for its final burial. The story goes, the psychohistory goes, a 14-year-old René Descartes saw this heart on the carriage, which broke his own heart, and he vowed never to have his heart broken again. And from that came cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And since that time, thinking has been the predominant energy of the Western culture. And we can look and see what that has produced. But at the same time, what we have lost in many ways is our ability to see, because we put so much emphasis on how we think. So that's maybe one explanation for why that is the case for many or all of us. Another issue that comes up and caught my attention, and actually it comes from the gospel, the Christian Gospels. Jesus often refers to the poor. And since then, we often refer to the poor. And when we do that, we are denying people their stories and their names. We refer to them as the poor. We put them in a category, and it denies the possibility of being in relationship one with another. I remember when I was in college, Bill Russell came to address the college. He had recently retired. Bill Russell, who won 11 NBA titles in 13 years, one of the best basketball players ever. He was 6'9", but even taller. But to my mind, he was even more impressive in his eloquence and his dignity. And he told a story of being in an airport. And a woman came up to him one day and looking at his size and maybe recognizing him and saying, "Oh, you're a basketball player." And quickly and clearly he said to her, "No, madam, I'm a man who plays basketball." His humanity came first. The language that we use often sets up a level of cultural blindness, which makes life difficult for us to live with. We talk about mission, certainly in the Christian tradition, but I think any organization has a sense of mission. And certainly in the Christian tradition, mission as it was understood 250 to maybe 100 years ago was the notion of we bring God to places where God is not. Think of that for a moment. Think of the arrogance of that. When in fact there's not a square inch of ground on the face of the earth where God is not working. So there's been a revision, which I applaud, but the revision doesn't go as far as it needs to go. Mission is doing for others. And sometimes we need to do for others. People don't have enough to eat. We need to give them something to eat. If they don't have a place to live, we need to give them a place to live. We need to do things for others, but when we limit ourselves to that, we are reinforcing the gap between those who have and those who don't. And so the challenge is, to my mind, mission is being with one another. I want to introduce the concept of social capital. I'm not introducing it. Somebody in this audience tonight introduced it, certainly to me, and I think to all of us. Bob Putnam, who is here tonight. And I am not alone who would declare that Bob Putnam is nothing short of a national treasure. Can we just honor him for that, for who he is and what he does and the witness he makes? He wrote a book in 2000 called Bowling Alone. And he talked about social capital and the decline of social capital of the voluntary associations that we create, Rotary clubs, voting patterns, little leagues, church attendance, watch groups, and cited that those social capital networks have been declining for over 50 years. And he's written several books since then and sees perhaps an upswing. And he talked about that here in this forum 2 years ago. But he talks also about bonding capital and bridging capital. And if you didn't read the recent interview of him in the New York Times, was it 2 weeks ago? It's just fascinating to hear about bonding capital and bridging capital. And if you could put up the first slide. I want to introduce, not that one, then the other one. That one. I want to introduce the concept of mandorla. mandorla, mandorla. It is the shape that's created when two circles intersect. It's the almond. It's the Italian word for almond. You can see the almond there. And historically, mandorla was the intersection between heaven and earth. Today, it seems to me, it is the intersection between red and blue. And there are forces and voices, and we all know where they come from, and some of us subscribe to them, that want us to stay at the outer edge of the red and blue circle, to be bonding with each other, bonding capital. The mandorla is bridging capital. It is a risk to enter into that space because you have to give up a lot. It doesn't mean you give up your opinions or your perspective or your positions, but there's a willingness to engage with someone who looks at the world with a different kind of blindness than we do. Our polarization today can be depicted at the outer edge of those two circles. I remember reading several years ago that most of us, certainly this is the case in the New York area where I lived for a long time, receive on average 1,000 different messages a day, most of which we don't pay attention to, telling us that our hair needs to be a different color, our body needs to be a different shape, buy this car, vote for this person, by all means never vote for that person. And we hear all of that from the outer edges of those circles. And we feast on them. And we take refuge in them. And they are going to destroy us. The challenge, it seems to me, is to enter into the mandorla. Bridging capital is the middle space. It's a place of risk, place of surrender, not necessarily a place of compromise. It's a place of finding common ground, or more importantly, common purpose. Common purpose. That people who are red, people who are blue, can have common purpose. We can enter into that space. We can enter into that space, and there's historical precedent for it. The next slide, please. The one came up first. Machloket. It's a Hebrew word meaning that was coined by Rabbi Hillel, who was a contemporary of Jesus. This is 2,000 years ago. Instructed his students to disagree without hate. And Jews have been doing that for 4,000 years. Disagreements, as Rabbi Hillel said, disagreements for the sake of heaven. To learn how to disagree without hating. And that's getting harder and harder for us to do because there are the entrepreneurs of polarization that are out there that feed us every day. So, machloket is this time-honored practice in one part of our tradition, a Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, this brings me to Braver Angels that Bob mentioned earlier. How many know of Braver Angels? Many of you do. Those who don't, it was originally called Better Angels, formed after the 2016 election, so named after Lincoln's first inaugural address, appealing to the better angels of our nature. The better angels of our nature. We had to change our name because there was another group that was named Braver Angels, and instead of going to court and going through all this stuff, we said, no, we're going to change our name to Braver Angels, and given the polarization in this country, we need to be braver. And so since 2016, there have been literally thousands of conversations drawing together red and blue-leaning people, not to pull one side to the other, but to see if we can find common ground, to see if we can be in the mandorla space. And there are no end of workshops now. I now am co-leader of the Faith Communities Engagement Team. We're trying to engage more and more congregations of all stripes to engage in depolarizing work, to engage in the work of reconciliation, which is foundational, to my mind, to most every religious tradition. So Braver Angels is doing that work. In every state, there is an alliance. New Hampshire has an alliance. Actually, I'm going to New London on Sunday afternoon to meet with some of the people who have been engaged in their congregation or in their community. There's the Granite State Coordinator Group, and I've mentioned it to Dick Ames here. Their group of legislators in New Hampshire, I think there are 30 of them, red and blue, who have met together using Braver Angels norms and guidelines, and they want to continue talking with one another because the polarization is not something worth continuing, and it's not effective. One of the things that we're going to do this election day, and somebody in this audience has tentatively volunteered to do it with me, is to have two people stand together at polling places on election day. One red, one blue, with a sign that says, "We vote differently, but we hold America together." And our hope is to have that done in hundreds of polling places around the country. Will that move the needle? I don't know, but it's street theater. I call it public liturgy. It's going to make the statement that there are more people who want to work together to ensure our citizenship which trumps political polarization, something that we can do together. I want to talk a little bit about the prophetic. And religious traditions, we think the prophetic voice is the one who's calling us to do something. And I think that's true, but my experience is, over 45 years in ministry, the prophetic voice usually calls people to one side or the other, red or blue. I believe now it's an urgent need for the prophetic voice to call people into the mandorla, into that space. You can't pull people in that space. You can't push them into that space. You can't compel them into that space, but you can invite them into that space, which requires developing a level of relationship, of conversation, of listening, of being open. It is hard to do. It is hard to do. Many places where I have spoken, people will say to me, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't do that because then I will be betraying my values." And my response to them has been, my values are even deeper than they were before I started this work. But my desire to be in relationship trumps my values. My values haven't been watered down, haven't been revised, they're still there. But the recognition that we can be in relationship with one another is so important. And so I hear this from people on both sides of the political perspective. I can't do this because I will sacrifice my values. And it's not that they're afraid that they're going to be converted by the other side. No, they think that they're betraying some deeply held values. And what I've discovered, what many of us have discovered, certainly Braver Angels has discovered, when we gather together across this difference, something emerges that is really important. I was at the Braver Angels convention in Kenosha, Wisconsin, about a month ago, and there were 800 delegates, equal number of red and blue, and then some yellow who declared themselves to be independent. And the first plenary was a voluntary gathering of people to watch the debate, the presidential debate, a debate watch party. I thought it was a terrible idea because the nastiness of the debate would spill over into the gathered community and it would just be awful, and that didn't happen. Now you can say this is a self-selective group. People are there because they want to build relationships, build bridges. And as the microphone went around and people responded to what they heard, what they saw, there was a universal kind of feeling, oh, we are disappointed. Disappointed for different reasons. And people, we were, again, equal red, equal blue, we were disappointed for different reasons. And it said to those of us gathered there, and I'm here to witness to you in a prophetic way, that I think our differences, we can work through them. We can work through them. Application of the mandorla. Bob mentioned that I've done a lot of work in gun violence prevention. A lot of work in gun violence prevention, helped found Bishops United Against Gun Violence, which is 100 bishops across the country working to reduce gun violence, starting another group called Faith Leaders for Ending Gun Violence. And what's really interesting about this latter group, Faith Leaders for Ending Gun Violence, we decided we would retain ourselves as Christian, but we have progressive Christians and evangelical Christians who disagree on a whole lot, but are in concert around the issue of guns. And I think if we can continue to work at that, we might be able to move the needle. Several years ago, I went to a gun show. I wanted to see how all this works and to sort of see the other side. And it was in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. And most of the gun show was historic guns, classical guns. I remember one was on sale, a Civil War rifle, on sale for $25,000. And then there were all sorts of accessories, ammunition, holsters, all this. And I went around and I tried to be a fly on the wall, but I think I stuck out like a sore thumb. But I tried to be a fly on the wall. And I was listening to conversations. And what I was hearing were people talking in a language and using metaphors that were totally unfamiliar to me. I last shot a gun when I was a Boy Scout at age 12. This is a part of my life that I don't know. And the more I listened, the more I realized, oh my goodness, guns are a fundamental part of American culture. I may not like that, you may not like that, but they're fundamental to who we are. And the fear that I could sense on a lot of these gun rights owners is that we're going to take their guns away, which is to take away their culture. And as I reflected even more, I was aware of the arrogance, self-righteousness, and smugness with which I came to this gun show. And I find that over and over again in those of us who are working for gun violence prevention. It just ticks off the other side. I've said to somebody, I remember saying to somebody, I've done some podcasts with gun rights owners. I said, you have an automatic weapon. He said, you don't know what you're talking about. It's a semi-automatic weapon. That's an important distinction. And I don't know it. We need to know it better. And so many people feel shamed by the attitude of those of us who want to reduce gun violence. I learned many years ago, talking with a friend of mine who's been in gun violence prevention for 25 years, ever since his brother, an FBI agent, was killed in a gun shooting in an FBI office in Washington, D.C. Ever since, he's been committed to reducing gun violence. And I was in a conversation with a bunch of us, and I said, I used the term gun control. And he slapped me on the wrist, and he said, don't use that term. I said, well, why not? He said, as soon as you say gun control, it immediately devolves into a conversation about the Second Amendment, and you're done. You're not going to go anywhere. I said, well, what should I use? Gun safety. It isn't the best term, but it's better than gun control. Because gun control, the other side hears that is, oh, you just want to take away my guns. And so have to learn, those of us who are a little more progressive, to check and be aware of our arrogance, smugness, and self-righteousness. So I want to wind this up with a little discourse on hospitality. Hospitality is really a form of love. And as I read the New Testament, hospitality is non-negotiable. Always has to be offered. And it's getting harder and harder to do that, especially with people we think are different from us. It's harder to offer that hospitality. And hospitality and this notion of love is a power. It's a witness. It's not just a feeling, it's a witness. It's a commitment. It's a commitment to wish a blessing on someone else. Everyone, not just some, but everyone, including, no, especially on those we don't want to have blessed. And we all have that list. Some of them show up at Thanksgiving and Christmas. We all have that list. And the challenge, and this is from every religious tradition, is that we offer our blessing, our mitzvah, our barach to people, especially those that we disagree with. And it undermines or it mitigates this sense of demonization that we all feel, that we all can be drawn into. I remember after the Parkland shooting in Florida, it happened on Valentine's Day. This is in 2018. It also was Ash Wednesday, if you remember. 17 kids were killed. I've gotten to know one family of one of the young girls who was killed. And I remember gathering a bunch of teenagers together. I was still in New Jersey at the time, to hear what they thought, what they felt, what they were worried about. And I remember one teenager saying to me, she was walking down the hall with her best friend. And she said, sort of in jest to her friend, "Oh, if someone comes in, do I drape myself over you, or do you drape yourself over me?" Ha, ha, ha. They weren't kidding. That's a level of fear that people have, that these kids have, that they can't shake. And it's something that I think love is a weapon that we need to use to overcome that fear. Love is a weapon that's easy to learn, but hard to use. So I think for all of us, from whatever religious tradition we have or no religious tradition that we have, we need to be agents of love. Thank you. And invite any questions that anybody has. And if people can raise their hand, make a comment, a question, a refutation, or whatever, I will repeat the question. Yes, ma'am. Please. Can you stand?
What seems to me has changed since the time of Hillel is that it's not just so much anymore a matter of my opinion, your opinion, but there are lies, and there is a preponderance of lies out there spread over the internet. What do we do about that?
Since the time of Hillel, with the advent of, you didn't say this, but advent of technology, there are so many lies, misinformation that are spread over the internet. What do you do about that? Well, for myself, I spend a lot of time in prayer, which is not really an answer, but it is in some ways. I think to tell the truth, is, I think, important. The challenge with that, of telling the truth, Niels Dahl, who was the founder of atomic physics, a Danish physicist, in the early 1900s said, the opposite of a fact is a lie. 1 + 1 is never going to equal 3. But the opposite of a truth is a competing truth. Abortion is murder. Abortion is a woman's right to choose. Guns keep us safer. Guns make us less safe. So we have to sort of dive down into these levels of truth. And I think it's possible that we can get to a deeper understanding. That's my hope. That said, there are days, I spend a lot of my time trying to work on depolarization and on gun violence prevention. 2 very big rocks up very steep hills. And there are many days when I say, I'm done. I'm just going to look at the mountain. And then I meet other people who are doing this work, some of whom are in this room. And that keeps me going. It keeps me going. It's hard, but it's necessary. Thank you for that question. Other questions, comments? Yeah, Michael.
This notion of mandorla, can you give examples where it's been employed to, bring people together in sort of a historical perspective?
Yeah, examples of mandorla and historical perspective. Actually, I decided not to bring the slide. There's an icon of the risen Jesus who is framed in the mandorla. Not a halo, a mandorla. And he is reaching down into hell and pulling out Adam and Eve, people who want to come out. That is an example of that. I think Braver Angels is an example of mandorla. The issue of reconciliation. How can we engage in reconciliation? It is not easy to do, but it's something important to do. So I think that's a key piece. In my religious tradition, and some of you may have this practice as well in many Christian traditions, there's the exchange of the peace. Before we come to the altar table, we exchange the peace. And I remember when the peace was introduced in the liturgy in the 1970s, I was in college, and people didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. Some of you are laughing because you remember that. Some people sat down, some people walked out. I'm here to worship God, not to pay attention to the person to the right or on the left of me. My father said he thought the peace was some public relations device cooked up by headquarters to thaw out us frozen chosen Episcopalians. And we were the frozen chosen. And so I said, no. It goes back to the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel when Jesus says, if you're coming to the altar and you're bringing a gift, and remember that you have something against your brother or sister, put your gift down and be reconciled to your brother and sister, and then come to the altar. So the peace has become, over the last 50 years, a celebration of community, which has thawed out Episcopalians, which is a wonderful thing in many ways, but they've forgotten that it's an act of reconciliation. It's an act of reconciliation. An act of reconciliation is daring to go into the mandorla. And so often reconciliation is one person has a level of power and privilege. I want to be reconciled to you. Which means you have to come over to my side. That is not reconciliation. So there are many opportunities for us to do that, and it's something I think we need to live into. William.
I guess on that note, with gun violence, when you're having that conversation, shift your language from, forgetting what you said, gun control to gun safety.
Yeah.
You're working for a set goal, though, right? Like, shifting that is, in some ways, moving your own goalposts, isn't it? Gun control and gun safety are two different things. How does that?
I don't. Gun control, gun safety. How do they seem to be different things? One thing that I've learned in the gun violence prevention area is that there is common ground, common purpose in reducing the level of gun suicide. In New Hampshire, 80% of gun deaths are by suicide. Gun deaths are suicide. And when one uses a gun to commit suicide, it is 90 to 95% effective. And so I'm part of, it's sort of faded out a little bit, called the New Hampshire Firearm Safety Coalition. We meet at the Manchester firing range, and we are gun shop owners and gun trainers along with public health officials. And we all have a common purpose of reducing suicide. That is an arena where I think things can change, because everybody on both sides realizes this is a problem. Many gun rights people will tell me that they get irritated because they think that those of us on the gun violence prevention side have no appreciation for the safety protocols that they engage in. I remember talking to one guy. He went hunting with a friend, and they had to cross a fence. And this guy told me he unloaded his rifle of ammunition, crossed the fence, and his friend didn't. When his friend crossed the fence, this one guy said to him, "I am never going hunting with you again, because you haven't exercised safety protocols." There are lots of people on the gun rights side. I am absolutely safe with my guns. And there can be a digging in on both sides, but that needs to be honored and often isn't. But suicide is an arena, especially in New Hampshire, I remember going a couple years ago, the Firearm Safety Coalition, we had some posters and materials and brochures that we gave out to gun shops. And I provided these posters in the Cheshire County gun places, some of which are not there anymore. I had the wrong address, but some are. And some were eager and willing, and some said, no, this is not something we're going to put up because somebody wants to do it, they're going to do it anyway, whether they have a gun or not. So, but it's listening, it's developing relationship, that kind of thing. Yes, sir?
I have a next-door neighbor who is politically the opposite of me. This summer, me and my family have used our puppy as a vehicle to get to know this person. And this person, we don't discuss politics because we know that we disagree. But the dog has been the vehicle, and come to find out, this man absolutely loves and worships animals. And he also loves and worships music. And as a result, this guy has said to me, I know if you ever need a ride somewhere, I'll give it to you. And I'm not doing anything special, really. I'm just spending some time with him. But every time I leave, he says, thank you for spending some time with me. That's the most precious gift you can give me. I would have never thought, before we started visiting with the dog, that someone like him would say that to me. And our whole family uses the dog. He'll kid us. I haven't seen you in a while. And the other day, I haven't seen you in a few days. I was worried. He came to our house to check on us. So I can't change what's going on in Washington and the nation, but I can change what's happening between me and my next door neighbor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not going to repeat that story. It's a great story. Thank you for that. And may I join with everybody else? Thank you for dogs. And it's building a relationship. It's building a relationship. I remember talking to Senator John Danforth a few months ago, a Republican senator from Missouri. And he's an Episcopal priest. He's 86 years old. And talking to him about Braver Angels, interested and wants to support it. And he said that we've invested politics with much more energy than it deserves. And he talked about being in government, 30, 40 years ago when he was a senator, and they would get together across the aisle, have dinners together, their spouses would know each other. That's not happening now. And he was suggesting that Braver Angels convene a group of 3 Republican and 3 Democratic senators, he didn't suggest which ones, to spend a few days together in a sort of guided gathering, maybe bring a few puppies, and they could maybe build a relationship, because those aren't happening. They begin with their polarization rather than their humanity. So I think that's important. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Last summer, we were exposed to the Braver Angels group when we were at Chautauqua, and I came back and tried to figure out, where do we find one here in New Hampshire? Can you tell us as a group how we would get involved?
Yeah, Braver Angels in New Hampshire, braverangels.org, and if I remember, you can look on the map and you'll see New Hampshire and find out the state coordinators. I know them both, and afterwards I think I have both of their emails. And they have gatherings regularly on Zoom, and a community in New London, New Hampshire this is a congregation that has been hosting workshops within the congregation. Then they opened it up to the community, and so town councilors and so forth have been involved, and now they're working in the high school trying to do depolarization. It takes a lot of work, and some people say, well, what are we going to get out of this? And what people are saying, we're building relationships in a way that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. And I refer to Braver Angels, for those of you who know the Episcopal tradition, I refer to Braver Angels as the secular version of the Anglican movement. Our tradition was founded 500 years ago in polarization between Catholic and Protestant. And if we think it's bad now, it holds no candle to what it was like then. People's lives were lost. And the Anglican Communion said, we are both. We are both Protestant and we're Catholic. So anybody who's an Episcopalian here, if you're asked, are you Episcopalian, are you Protestant or Catholic? And we can answer yes. And so we live in that tension. We live in that tension. And in tension, that can be a place for creativity. And there are all sorts of examples of that, of where it thought we couldn't resolve the tension, but if you live into it long enough, something may emerge. In faith, I can say that. In faith, I have seen that. Yes, Tom, yes.
I've been a science teacher all my life, and including in Texas, where there's very strong, and I want to laud you for having the courage as a religious person to come out and say, think differently. And is anyone doing that around science? Because one of the biggest divides that I've seen is those who believe in evolution, those who don't. And
Yeah.
It's the cause of a lot of schism in many, many
Yeah, the question is about science versus denying or resisting scientific discovery. Am I fair in saying that? Yeah, and how do we deal with that? That's a challenge. Somebody I work with who comes from a very conservative religious tradition went to Wheaton College in Illinois, and he was a little more prepared. He was a biology major. And he said all these other students who were freshmen, for this first time in their lives, they were hearing about evolution. First time in their lives. And talk about intellectual whiplash. I mean, that was, and some couldn't embrace it, some could. We were in Grand Canyon a little while ago, and when you're there and you're looking at that vast expanse and seeing that chasm and seeing the bottom of the Vishnu schist, which is 1.5 billion years old, and then the layers on top of it, it just begs all sorts of questions. And we're told that there are alternative tours around the Grand Canyon that would say that, oh, well, God did this in the last 12,000 years. So you know, that tension, how do you live with that tension? And the tendency is to dismiss it, but to recognize there are lots of people for whom that is foundational to who they are. And that needs to be honored. And it can be very difficult to honor that, because to those of us who subscribe to a different way of looking at the world, doesn't make sense. Well, it does to them. So what are we going to do? We have to listen and build a relationship. Other comments, question? Yes, Alan.
Suppose you're in a situation in which it's a purple discussion, and then the other person says something that really disgusts you. What do you do? What do we do?
You're in a purple conversation, so in the middle of the mandorla, and somebody says something that's really offensive. Well, it depends on, you know, I'm going to equivocate here. And how offensive is it? And to ask the question, what did you mean by that? Or to say, this is how this affects me. When you say that, actually, I'm somebody I work with in Braver Angels, who's a red, very strong red, and she has a laptop, and on the decal on her laptop says pro-choice, 9 millimeter, 45 millimeter, 100 millimeter. And I wrote her, I said, you have absolute right to have that on your laptop. Absolute right. But you need to know how that affects me. And we're about depolarization here. That doesn't help. That doesn't help. So, and I think it can work both ways. Yeah, Jack.
I find myself often in those situations where somebody says something that I'm like, that is really not working for me. That's my interior thought process. But in my best days, I will say instead, help me understand how you got to that. It's very non-confrontational.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think it gives people an opportunity to, maybe think about it and articulate it, and then you can have a conversation that is not, I'm offended, who the hell are you?
Yeah. No, the idea is that somebody says something that really rankles you in a negative way. How did you come to that conclusion, which opens up the conversation, and in fact is an invitation into the mandorla, to my mind, and sometimes it's hard to do because you just want to pound your fist on the table and say, "What?" On our better days. On our better days, and there are lots of forces and voices out there that don't want us on our better days. And I think we have the capacity to live into being braver angels, if you will. Not to trumpet braver angels. We're creating a movement, as I mentioned earlier, to try and depolarize America, not unlike the civil rights movement. I mean, we're sort of looking at that and saying, how can we do this, and how do you measure that? How do you evaluate that? And, how many conversations can you convene? But it's stories like the puppy. They're anecdotal, they're narratives that I think we need to hear and tell because it's possible. Because again, there are forces and voices on both sides that don't want us to tell those stories, that don't want us to experience it that way. One more or two more questions. Yeah, in the very back. Yes?
Thank you for an excellent talk. Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. It sounds like in New Hampshire that you had a big impact in finding common ground with the suicide issue in particular. So my question is, broader across the country, the impact of Braver Angels. How many people are involved, and what issues where do you see the greatest impact in finding common ground?
Yeah, that's a great question. Where is the greatest impact? And the suicide is not a Braver Angels initiative. It's from the New Hampshire Firearms Safety Coalition. But that said, and we should feel proud of this, at least 10 other states have copied or consulted with the New Hampshire folks. How can we do this in Idaho or in Colorado, where we have a real serious gun suicide problem? But Braver Angels has braver politics, braver education, braver music, braver faith communities where it's branching out further and further, because there are lots of different arenas where people spend a lot of their time. And there are about 15,000 members, and I encourage all of you to go look at braverangels.org. It's $12 a year. We have an enormous reach and a wider impact across the country, but our membership has been somewhat stable. We're hoping that these witnesses that we're going to do at the polling places on Election Day will lift that up more. And I hear more and more particularly from faith communities, because that's where I spend a lot of my time, people saying, help me. We got people in our congregation who aren't talking to each other because they're at odds with one another. And, how we have resources. We're going to put together a whole array of resources, pre-election and post-election, for congregations, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. We're going to be doing that over the next several months because people, want to do this. And it seems to me, from my perspective, the religious community is foundational to all this. As the religious community was, in many ways, the foundation of the civil rights movement, I think depolarization can call on religious witness from different perspectives. One last question, and then we need to stop. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier difficulty over the introduction of the practice of peace.
Yes.
In your church. we have some shared cultural assumptions. And I think there may be people present who don't know what the peace, the passing of peace is. So, and whether I'm wrong or not, I was wondering if you could just explain what that is.
Sure.
And then I would suggest maybe before or after we apply, we do it.
Okay, the suggestion came from you. I like it. The peace is an act of reconciliation where you, in the Catholic Church, they do it just before people come up for communion. In the Episcopal Church, and I think the Lutheran Church, we do it just at the end of all the ministry of the Word and the prayers. And we need to make peace with one another before we come to a deeper experience of worship. And so what people do is they just shake the hand of the person next to them and say, the peace of the Lord be always with you and also with you. And what I say to congregations is the person that you exchange the peace with symbolically represents someone with whom you need to be at peace. And if the person standing next to you is the person you live with, often that's the person you most need to make peace with. And in many ways, it's the most important thing I think that we can do, to be agents of reconciliation, to walk our puppy and build a relationship with our neighbor. I invite people to stand. And I invite people, at your suggestion, your name? David. At David's, just say, shake the person, or one person's hand, or two people's hands. Say, peace be with you. Peace be with you.
On that positive note, I'd like to thank Mark Beckwith for a very dynamic and thought-provoking presentation. Now, you all know it's our tradition that we have a presentation. We always, he's coming over for it, that we give some good New Hampshire maple syrup. And I was hoping to steal it, but I guess I won't be able to. David, thank you very much for your great presentation.
Thank you.
Now, you know I wasn't going to take that. We hope you'll join us next week. We have an excellent program. Gordon Peary and friends will join the forum to talk about and sing in honor of the Peterborough Folkway. There's probably going to be quite a crowd here, so get here a little bit early to claim your seat. So please now join our speaker next door at the Parish House for some late refreshments and our reception. The Amos Fortune Forum is now adjourned.